Welcome to Wellness Radio with Dr. Jeanette Gallagher as your host. Her show discusses topics of health, wellness, and spirituality, and is about discovering your place in this great universe, from your cells to the cosmos. Along with her guests, in casual conversation, she strives to ask the difficult questions that may be holding you back from a vibrant life, and shares new ideas that may inspire you to make a change in your life that you only can see in your dreams. And now, here is Dr. Jeanette Gallagher.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Wellness Radio. This is Dr. Jeanette Gallagher, and it's a pleasure to have you with us here this evening. Tonight we are going to be talking about our communication. What are we spewing? What are we saying? What are we sharing? What are we trying to give out as perhaps helpful? Perhaps we try to engage with others to get to an outcome. Perhaps we have communication because we wish to share how we can work together. What happens when all of these systems just seem to go, what's going on? We're hitting a wall. And someone says something and it just like all of a sudden you feel like you're pinned to the wall. All of a sudden it feels like it just doesn't work for you. All of a sudden you're going, did I just say that? And perhaps I offended someone. Perhaps maybe it wasn't in the best interest of the company. Perhaps it wasn't the best interest of being a better human being. What we're talking about is the evolution of communication. It truly is happening this year in the 2025. If you look back in history, many times people just said whatever was on their mind, they said it, hey, and if you didn't like it, get out of my way kind of idea. Everybody was up. They had their path. They put up their walls, their barriers, their boundaries, and they lived in their own little silo. Now we're all trying to be able to communicate. Can I be better? Can I do better? Because we are engaging with more people. We are looking at different concepts. We're saying the old no longer works, and how can we facilitate a more harmonious way of engaging day to day? Is that truly what we're looking at? Perhaps they're saying, just how do I even get started? My guest today is Cynthia Kane. Her book is The Pause Principle, How to Keep Your Cool in Tough Situations. Cynthia, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you for having me. I'm really thrilled to be here with you today.
So glad to have you, Cynthia, because don't you think there's really a truly, as I call it, evolution going on with communication?
I do. I really do. I think that it's very clear that right now there is a want for people to connect in a different way, to be able to show up in a more, connected way, kind, helpful way than maybe there was in the past.
Yeah, because before, I grew up in the 50s. I've had jobs, all the way from the 60s on up. And I think of it was, this is the rules, this is the way it is, it's your way, my way, or the highway, kind of, so to speak, Mm-hmm. And I think there is a very small percentage at this time of companies that are saying, let's do better, perhaps?
Yeah, I believe that. I think that a lot of the past type of communication was very much from, the top down, in the sense mm-hmm. of really, the one being heard. And what's happening more and more recently is, especially within companies, is a lot of the staff or teams are expressing themselves more than ever before, right? And really being more clear on what their needs are. And that can be confusing for those in, managing positions to know how to even handle those kinds of conversations.
Well, I think it's really the evolution of social media, because people are learning, hey, I've got a voice and someone's going to listen to me. Whereas in mm-hmm. the past, we don't care which kind of voice you have. This is your job right. when you walk in here, and it's, here's the book of rules and you follow them. So, I can distinctly remember, I was a dental hygienist in the 70s, and I can distinctly remember it was, don't you ever step outside the box. One day a patient right. came in and her husband had died and she missed her appointment. And the dentist was berating her, and I just had given her a hug, and they were like, don't you dare step out. Don't you dare do that. And it was, wow. Yeah. So it's a great evolution. And, I'd love to kick all those days to the curb, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think that it really is also now because it's so different. It's such a gray area for people in terms of kind of knowing, how to communicate in a different way, and the challenge of that, because we are so conditioned to believe that is this old way, that how do we break out of that and deal with, because there's a lot of fear when it comes to communicating and expressing our needs or our wants, and so much of that comes from the old way, right? The idea that there is a right way to do it, and if you don't do it this way, consequences will happen.
Yeah, I got let go from so many jobs because I said something, quote, outside of the box, so to speak. And I look back at it, and I'm going, I know it may have ruffled my feathers at the time, but I don't think it ruffled it to be able to set me back, so to speak. And I think sometimes people will say, right from the beginning when I picked up the book and it said pause, and I'm going, whoa, slam on the brakes. Almost when you hear that, when you want to take a pause, you're going, the train came out of my mouth. It came from wherever it came, and you're telling me pause. And it's like you could hear the train cars crashing behind you. Don't you think so?
It's like that screeching noise.
Right. I see that visual. It's like they're backing up and they're exploding, and you're going, because I've had interactions with people over the decades, and you literally have to turn to the side. They are so angry they're spewing, you know what I mean? Yeah. So, and I think that's important to note what kind of conversation you're having first before you even want to use the pause principle, because if you've got someone that's spewing, maybe you need to exit stage left, right?
True. Yes. Yeah. I think it's really noticing just the discomfort in the body, maybe in a difficult conversation, and knowing if it's too heightened of a conversation, or we're too heightened in that moment to even be able to press the pause button, so to speak. And sometimes we do have to exit those interactions to then be able to regroup, reset, maybe come back or maybe not come back.
Yeah, and I think that's vitally important, because a lot of times people will say, there must be something wrong with me, and they keep trying to work on themselves, and it has nothing to do with them. It has to do with the other person. So I think there's a lot of regrets in a lot of people that are working, and also there's a lot of irresponsibility sometimes on the other side, perhaps. Yeah,
I think so. And I think that it's difficult when we're in those interactions and we're trying so hard to say the right thing, make sure we're not ruffling any feathers, right? And we can't control the other person. And so that's, our responsibility in that moment is really how we're interacting and how we're engaging, and it's the other person's responsibility for themselves as well. So it's hard because we can't control someone else's reaction, and we know that they're going to react no matter what, right? Because that's just how we're wired in general.
But also, too, don't you think we have to look at, all of a sudden, where is it coming from? So to speak, read the room. If you're going in and someone has a very regimented way of working, you could see it in their office, you could see it in their demeanor, you could feel it when you walk in the room within the energy. You kind of are going to expect that. And you can't go in all fluffy, all, chaotic, all jittery or whatever, and expect to have a similar result. So I think that sometimes you have to, as we say, read the room and find out where is this coming from when they start to talk, perhaps.
Yeah, and I also think it's so important in that moment, right, for us to listen to ourselves in that moment, because it's, we can't change other people. And so if that environment is not the correct environment for us, we're able to notice that and see, and maybe, find a different environment that would be more welcoming to how we would like to be communicating.
What's funny, Cynthia, is over the decades, you're definitely much younger than I am. However, I can distinctly remember, if you got a job and you held on to it for dear life,
Yeah.
And now people are like, they could have 6 jobs in 2 months, and they don't think anything of it. But don't you think that that's the climate of the business now? In other words, when we say the evolution of communication, we're also saying the evolution of the outcomes, the evolution of feedback, the evolution of how am I presenting this in the first place. That is all coming along sort of like in the same kind of evolutionary ball, perhaps?
Yeah, I think you're right. It really does all come, it's all this, like when you mentioned the ball, like I just see it kind of rolling along and gaining speed and growing and just getting bigger and bigger.
Yeah. What's so interesting? Sometimes, when you talk and you get in those conversations, do you sometimes just want to say, I'm just going to shut up? In your head, it just says, I literally am closing my eyes right now and I'm seeing the pause button. The pause button, and when you see it on TV, it's those 2 lines, and sometimes you just have to say, just stop. Less is best, just stop. Isn't that where you want to really say start in your book?
Yeah, actually. Because when we are able to stop, then we can restart, right? And we can restart through a different lens. And that's the whole real purpose in a lot of ways of pausing. It's for us to re-engage in a conversation in a way that keeps the integrity of the conversation intact, or in a way that it can be seen through a different lens. We get to use different language. The pause, it helps us know when we're in hurtful territory, and maybe we do need to, slam on the brakes and know when to speak and when not to speak, so that then we can express in a kind, honest, and helpful way.
What I also thought about communication in a business environment, or it could be family, it could be anything, because these are all our same relationships. You think about the filters of which our energy is focusing through. In other words, when I see you, I'm seeing it based on my experiences. In other words, if I see someone come into the office and they're all disheveled, I'll say, oh, they don't care about it, they don't need this job, and they're out. Instead of perhaps taking away the filters and asking, perhaps, what is going on for you today? How are you feeling? How did your day start out? In other words, asking them without my filter, and you may hear, oh my gosh, my kid was sick. He threw up all over me. This is the only clothes I had in my car. I'm taking this from his perspective. Of course, I had 4 kids as a single mother. But I'm looking at it. I'm saying, my kids threw up on me. This is the only clothes I had in my car. I had to put them on. I'm sorry I'm late. Give me 5 minutes. I'll try to regroup. And isn't that a total flip of the coin in how we can help those that are around us?
It really is. Because then we get to connect on a more human level, first off. But it's also, it makes it so that the way that we are, interacting in that moment is more of a shared experience, as opposed to coming through with our own judgments and evaluations. We get to drop the evaluation, drop the judgment, and see through, see how can we be helpful to this person, asking ourselves questions that make us curious to know more, so that then we can meet them where they're at and then make decisions from that place.
Yeah, because so many times I can look back, on so many communications in my experience, and I'm going, what if they just said it a different way? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or what if they just shared it a different way? And I'm going, even, within my own relationship, I had said something to someone, and they were like, oh, my gosh, what's the problem now? And I'm going, oops. If you had just said, oh, what's going on today? Instead, without all of your angst being added into it, it totally changes the way we are as humans. And I know for myself, working so much with patients at end of life, when they start unleashing, let me tell you, you'd best just sit down and wait until they're done, because they have pent up so much angst in their being that they just never unlock that Pandora's box. Don't you think we all have those boxes that where we just really need to spew to the heavens?
Yes, we do. I mean, which is why I think when we're listening to other people, it's so much more about witnessing the other person or observing the other person, as opposed to getting hooked into the language of what they're saying, but really sitting and holding that space for the other person, I think is really, it's so important.
You know what I also tried, Cynthia, is that I put a glass of salt water next to them when they had to be able to unleash, right? And just, I said, let everything go into that. Because you know what? I didn't want it to come and stick on me. It had nothing to do with me. I didn't want the energy to stay in the room. I didn't want anyone to say, well, you know, if you had just listened, or, well, maybe I think you're looking at the wrong way. You know, you think about the narcissists, how they seem to have wings these days, you know, when you want to be able to voice your communication. Every narcissist will come out of the wall, you know. But you think about it and you say, if you can just say, I'm going to keep breathing. I'm just going to stay in my position, and I'm going to allow them to have that experience. That, I think, is the greatest gift of unconditional love you can give anybody. I don't care if it's in business for 5 seconds. If you ever let that mother that came in that was a total disaster say, have a seat, drink some coffee, tell me what happened, and give her 5 minutes, it will change the whole day, and she'll be the perfect employee, you know? Or that person will go along and they will just pass on graciously in the night, so to speak. But we don't give anyone that gift of unconditional moment. Do you think?
I don't think we do. I don't think a lot of us know how, right? Because I don't think it's something that we, like when we're talking about the evolution of communication, I don't think it's actually something that anyone was doing previously and nor has been really taught to do. And so it's such a learned skill that that really is so powerful, because you know you're just allowing the other person to be as they are, and that's really all we want in our relationships, any relationship, right? Is to be able to be who we are and be seen for that.
You know, there's 3 things. There's only 3 things we came on this earth for. Everybody thinks it's for the obituary, but I totally disagree. You know, it's about to be loved, cared for, and to be heard. That's it. If we could look at those 3 things every day, we would say, and you mean I'm wasting all my other time on this baloney? And you would step back and you would truly start saying, I choose not to do that anymore. I choose not to engage in that anymore. We're like, you mean I? And it's kind of like finally someone's giving you permission and letting you off the hook. So I give everybody permission. These are the 3 things: to be loved, to be cared for, you know, and to be heard. Those are it. Perhaps?
Yeah. I think, I mean, and if you filter it through or you use that lens, like at the beginning of the day, to have that be the intention, then your language comes out according to that, and your choices come out according to that, and you get to then be in those situations and know very clearly, right? Like, this is not moving me towards that. It's moving me. I'm getting distracted here, right? So dropping that distraction.
Let's talk about the idea of a company, you know. A company, someone owns it. Of course, we all talk about ownership. So in other words, it's acquisitions. And then whatever comes in is related to whatever it's about, I own, and it is my acquisition, and it must be a reflection of my rules and my person. And you think about it, you're going, you know, I get it, because that's how businesses work. However, we also have to remember that it's also, once you have an acquisition, it's also your safety and security is challenged every day when someone opens up their mouth or shares or engages in your business. And that's where the fear, the violence, the abuse, the attacks, the derangement, so to speak, the really disconnect. And I can distinctly hear it ringing in my ears, because I'm sure I've heard it in work. This is not anything about you. This has nothing to do with you. We don't want to hear any of that stuff. This is a business. This is how the business runs. So you have this conglomerate that you've created, and you want everyone to leave their humanness at the door, because now we are going to act as robots within this construct. Don't you think that's truly the mechanism by which business works?
Yes, I do. And I think that that's where people are finding so many challenges today, because, again, it's an old construct, right? And this is kind of new territory where we're, trying to bring in the humanness, like, to the working world, and seeing companies soften their edges so that they can be more relatable, right?
Are they softening their edges so they could be relatable, and they're saying, we will give them 1% because we'll get 2% back from them, so to speak? You know what I'm saying? So in other words,
I know you mean. Yeah.
Right. Will we appear as if so that we can garnish them in? It's almost, it almost seems like a saprophytic kind of relationship, feeding off other things. And you're going, you can feel it, and you're going, once you get in, what did I get sucked into? So there's a false sense, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, it is, when you're looking at it, it is easy to see, I think, that so many companies now are bringing in, this work of culture, trying to create more company culture, create more connection, human connection. And, I mean, it is based on studies that have been done that show that creating that ends up, driving profits. It makes people, stay within the company longer. So it is based on, the studies and the outcomes that they're finding. So I can see that, Yeah,
because, that remember when they started bringing in, we'll have coffee, and then other companies in other countries will say, we're having a rest break, or we're allowing them to, some of those bigger companies, we'll have a ping pong table and all this other stuff. And then what they found out was that they brought in so much other humanness, they really didn't even do work.
Right.
So it's like, how do you bridge that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and I think that a lot of that bridging comes through setting boundaries and expectations and the values of a company, and, being able to communicate really clearly and consciously about, expectation.
But don't you think that's where all the miscommunication comes in, Cynthia, is because the walls and the barriers, in other words, we'll give a little, we'll take a little, it's too fluid. In other words, when you're an employee, you don't know where the dice is today. You don't know where the wall is set. In other words, you might take because you see it and you're going, that was okay. I'll take a little more. Okay. But then all of a sudden you go in the next day and it's, that's not there anymore, and you get slammed. So in other words, the wall is too fluid, don't you think?
So, I mean, I think that's interesting, right? Because I think that I think there are a lot of companies where it is really fluid, and then there's companies where it's really rigid, right? And one, like, it is this way and only this way, and then the other is today it's this way, tomorrow it's this way. And so then again, it does rely more on you as the individual to know where you belong, right? By listening to yourself and knowing this is the best place for me to engage and communicate, or this is the best environment for me, right?
I can remember this one time. I just needed to get out. And I had gone to a local florist, and I said, I just need a job. I just want to be able to have a job, temporary job, for maybe the holiday season, being Christmas, Mother's Day, and Valentine's Day, because I wanted to engage in something different. I had to get out of my head, working too much with patients that were dying. It was just, I needed to shift my energy. So I went in. And from the first day, I'm going, oh, my gosh, this is so dogmatic. It feels really weird in here. It does not feel, like, you walk into flowers, you feel welcomed by nature and everything. I'm going, what's up with this? And eventually, over the period of time, I said, oh, the flowers are all chemicalized. Ooh, they're all dead. And they would just peel off the dead parts and put the other parts out. Or, if they had a broken statue, they would just say, stick it underneath the thing. They'll never notice, ship it out. Or I would feel that they would be, oh, well, they didn't ask for that, but this is what we have, and we're going to put it in there. And I was starting to feel this dogmatic, and I was going, oh, this doesn't feel right and everything. And I can distinctly remember one time they asked me to help someone because everybody else was busy on doing a spray for a casket. And the women came in, and they were bickering and everything and blah, blah, blah. And I said, honey, they kept saying, well, Mom wants this, and Mom wants that. I said, honey, your mom's in here. What do you want? And all of a sudden, you would have thought that I committed cardinal sin. I mean, seriously, it was really bad. And, I mean, like, everybody just froze. And then all of a sudden, they sat down and they said, let's think about this. And then they said, we'll come back. And they came back, and I can remember at the florist got very angry at me for doing it, blah, blah, blah. But then after a while, they came back, and they had planned something, and they did it. And they had sent a note to the florist about me that if someone hadn't stopped them in their tracks and hadn't reflected back to them in the moment, they would have never gotten anywhere, and they would have continued upon that path. So I think that's true in almost any business. You say, hey, stop for a second. Perhaps?
It is. It's the moment where you realize that you're caught up, or you're distracted, or you're, thinking, you're just not thinking clearly, right? You're being advised, or you're taking in other people's opinions, and you're really losing that connection with yourself and losing that moment where you check in with your wants, your needs. And so much of it is being able to take that pause, take that, that moment in time to be able to see things clearly, or see differently, or choose a different way to interact than you have been.
Yeah, it's like you need to unplug the mechanism from the wall, sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah. You have to force stop sometimes.
Yeah. Also, too, Cynthia, you talk in your book about feeling it in your body, and I'm going, I can tell you from the work I do, 99% of the people have no clue what their body feels like.
Yes,
they truly don't. And if you say feel it in your body, they're going, no way. I've been drugging myself to push away my symptoms for decades. Yeah. I'm not feeling my body. It isn't working. I don't care. Or I don't want to feel into all the stuff that I've been stuffing behind. So sometimes when you say feel into your body, man, you really come into some craziness, don't you think?
Yeah, and I think it is really, really hard for people to know what they feel, because so much of everything has been pushed down over years and decades, and, we don't even know what a pleasant sensation is in the body, or a neutral sensation. And so it's starting to, unpack that, and to start to see feeling not as something that we want to push away, or we want to ignore, or we want to numb out, but can we actually, sit with it? And there is a lot of pushback in that, but that's actually where the growth is, right?
But also, too, you hear a lot of companies say, we're not a psychologist or a psychiatrist here, we're not a social worker, we're not doing that. Once we open that box, that's where we're going, and I'm not doing that. Perhaps?
Yeah. I mean, there is a lot of pushback in terms of, the idea that it's a little too, I guess some people would call it too woo-woo, right? To connect with the body in that way.
Yeah.
So but what ends up happening is that when people start to pay more attention to what's happening in those challenging moments, that's their cue to be able to communicate differently, or to use a practice that can help them through that emotion, so that then they can express themselves more calmly.
I remember it was maybe 77, 78. Along came Quest in the dental practices. And it was the idea of, we need to be able to have these circles in the morning, see where everybody is, reset everybody's energy so we can have a productive day. And then you were given an amount that you had to, quote, produce that day. And at the end of the day, you'd have another circle. Why didn't you produce that day? And it was like, it was kind of an ulterior motive to get you to step into the harmony, but then you had to work within the machine to have this outcome that they were requiring. And actually, when I look back at it in reflection, I'm going, that was the most damaging thing ever. And I distinctly remember doing those circles in the morning. And when we started doing them, it really felt like, you almost felt like we're taking out our arrows and we're just going to spew whatever. Well, I don't like the way you said that. Well, you shouldn't have said it that way. Well, why weren't you nicer to that patient? Or why didn't you get on the phone and call those 20 patients before you left? I don't care if it was past time, blah, blah, blah. So it's a lot of this very derogatory, very negative, and very destructive way of doing things. But then they said at the end, you always had to say something nice. Well, it was fake. What was the point?
Right.
So the idea is how can you decide what you do share, what you don't share, what's reality, what's an illusion, what's true, what's fake, and what's really coming at you. I think those words is distinctly what you share in your book, the pause principle, and you talk about how to be able to walk through those. But let me tell you, when you stand there and it's in front of you, it's a whole other ball game, right?
I mean, it is really challenging in the moment, right? To be able to listen if somebody is sharing difficult, criticism or feedback or and the way that they're saying it is pushing all your buttons. Really what you want to do is either lash out, get passive aggressive, shut down, or just walk away, right? So it is really challenging because in that moment, it's the awareness or the consciousness to be able to know, okay, I'm in a heightened state right now. And for me to be able to handle this situation, I need to bring myself down, right? If I'm at a 5, I need to bring myself down to at least a 2. So that then I can talk, right, in a way that's not going to be hurtful. So how do I do that? And so it's a practice. And, that's why people think it's very easy when they say, just take a breath and then speak. But it's very challenging to do that, right? You have to actually know how to get to the point where you can take the breath. And so much of that is that awareness and that noticing of what's happening within me before I can express and be kind outwardly, right?
Because it's always about the outcome of the end thing or the flash moment. In other words, if someone says, well, I heard this, well, they don't know the whole story that played up to that got you to that point. Maybe it was truly the other person, but they saw your reaction to that, and or else they're saying, okay, we'll have a different reaction. So there's a lot of factors. I think I almost, as I close my eyes now, I see this spinning wheel, and it's sort of, are we really getting anywhere? Or really, do we want to get anywhere? Don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's wondering really what the intention is behind all of it, or what's the why behind all of it, right? And most of the time we don't go into our conversations or our relationships thinking about what is the intention here, to be, kind or to help the other person feel seen, or, it's like what you were sharing before, like looking through the lens of those 3 things that we need, that would change everything. So, I think that's lacking right now.
Yeah, and also, too, I think about it, they have so many cameras in the office now, and they record everybody and everything you do. So it's almost as if, is the real person you showing up, or is the person in which they want to create showing up?
Yeah. Well, and I think there's so many people now trying to figure out how to be authentic at work, right? Like how to actually be themselves in the workplace, and is that possible to do?
Because you think about it in relationships, it's like, I'm not dare going to say that because they're going to walk, or I'm not going to dare say that because my safety is at risk again, or my security is at risk. So I think, don't you think the three-tier things that are so vitally important in this conversation is power, safety, and security?
Yeah. I mean, I agree with that 100%, because I think that safety and security is what you need to be able to express yourself, right, clearly, and to be able to be more yourself. And I think the challenge is like the power dynamic, and the fear that comes in with expressing yourself in those situations.
So really, Cynthia, do you think that we are getting anywhere, or are we just dancing in the ethers, so to speak? In other words, I think little by little. Yeah. I mean, I think more and more people are trying to figure out a better way. I think that, I do think that it's such a shift away from what people have been doing, and it's not a mass movement, let's say, as I would love for it to become. But I think it's really only for those people who are able to see that what has been working is no longer working. And, it's more of a learned skill that they're interested in seeing what changes in their lives, or, if it's within a company setting, what changes within the company by becoming more honest and kind and helpful in our interactions. You know what also, too, Cynthia, there's a lot of, sometimes people will say, well, I'm going to step out of the corporate business or whatever, and they're going into nonprofits, and they're forming their companies there, or they're doing a private company, and they are so woo-woo, so to speak, as others would say, and they're so far over the other edge that they can't even get things done. You know what I'm saying? In other words, they bring so much of their humanness into it. It's sort of like, we spent all day on your humanness. What did you get done for the business? How did we accelerate ourselves forward? So I think there is this great extreme where people will say, I'm so disheartened with that other way, I'm going to do it this other way, and then they end up so far on the other side. Is there a possibility to recognize that these two dichotomies are really going on?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can see it clearly within different companies, right? Or, you can look at the extremes. And the ones that I think are really thriving are those that are, in the middle path. They're really being able to mix or marry the two, the two types of paths.
It's sort of like, I'll put a microwave in and I'll give you time for your lunch, but I'm not going to provide your lunch for you every day, It's sort of like, how can you get into that middle space, right? Yeah.
And I think that a lot of being able to get to that middle space is being able to step back, right, to pause and step back and look at the bigger picture and look at what's actually happening with clear eyes, right? And then once you're able to see clearly, then you can make the choices that are necessary to create that more of a hybrid.
Yeah. Well, also, too, in closing, Cynthia, who really has the ultimate power? When you look at it, is it the machine? Is it the owner? Is it the CEO? Is it the person? Or is it the players? Or is it the machine itself or the working people? Who has the power to have the outcome to be realized?
That is such a great question. I mean, I really think it's, I still really think it's the people. Because there's more change that can be created, through many voices. And so I really think that it's the people, and also I think that if more, if more managers or more people in those leadership positions could kind of adopt the idea of slowing down, of pausing more, of speaking differently to those that are working with them or changing their relationships, then I think that, everybody would be thriving.
It's so different, I think, that people are saying, how can we become better? And we aren't really sure what the better means. So I think in the year 2025, we're kind of testing things out. Ooh, can I step this way? Can I step that way? Can I do this? Can I do that? In other words, if you remember back in the decades, it was, let's have jeans on Friday kind of idea. And they stepped into that,
Yeah.
Yeah, and also the idea of, well, maybe my hair, doesn't need to be up on Fridays. It can be, I can wear my hair differently on Fridays kind of idea. So there are these stepping stones that we have as a humanity, and I think that's just part of the evolution circle, perhaps.
Yeah, I think so, and I think that, it'll be really interesting as we continue to see how it continues to evolve.
Yeah. Every day we see another company bites the dust. In other words, big conglomerates have gone. And what we see is that other people are starting to take up the staff, so to speak. They're saying, I don't need that, but I can provide a little piece of what you did and do it differently. And I think perhaps we will say that we don't all need to be the big tree at the top or the big 5-star building. Perhaps maybe we can have several small businesses. I live in New Orleans. The city thrived on small businesses. But I'm noticing, I've been here decades. I'm noticing it's going away, and now these other companies are coming in and we're going, oh my gosh, and now the little businesses are going away. So where humanity is going, we have no clue. We're just here to observe, right?
Yeah, I agree. I think that's it. It's all pretty uncertain, and so our work is really to just witness.
Yep, absolutely. It's one of those three things, that's about how we can do each day. Definitely. Yeah. Well, Cynthia, it was a pleasure to have you. Can you share with the listeners how to find out more information about your work?
Yeah, so they can go to cynthiakane.com, www.cynthiakane.com, or you can find me on Instagram at CYKANE, and also you can check out my book, The Pause Principle, How to Keep Your Cool in Tough Situations. And, I'd love to hear from you.
Very good. Well, Cynthia, it was a pleasure to have you with us here because I can tell you everyone has this question. The stuff is coming at me. What do I do with it? I don't know. And they're saying also, too, I'm really getting tired of putting it out there and it's not being heard. So everyone's in a communication dilemma these days.
Well, Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for joining us. If you would like to find out more information about Cynthia Kane, again, the book is The Pause Principle, How to Keep Your Cool in Tough Situations. Please do click on the link on the bottom of today's show page to go directly to her website for more information. And it is about being able to say, hold on for a second, just breathe. Give yourself 1 second. Just close your eyes. No matter what's coming at you, just imagine this thing in front of you. Put up your little, kind of like your filter and say, I'm going to stop it. I'm going to stop what's coming out of me. I'm going to stop what's coming into me and just give my 1 second to breathe. Can we just do that for 1 second? Maybe things will start to shift. That it's all about our communication evolution. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is Dr. Jeanette Gallagher. Until tomorrow, have a great day.
Today we discussed many life-changing concepts. Who do you turn to, and how do you know what is best when faced with a health crisis? Dr. Jeanette is a patient advocate. She listens to the patient, the doctors, and the family, clarifies the health issues and concerns, then helps the patient make the best choices going forward. If you would like help implementing change into your life and health, we can talk and see where you are stuck and how to improve the quality of your life. Check the link on the bottom of today's show page or visit drjeanettegallagher.com to schedule a phone appointment today.